The Void Stalker circled Jake slowly, keeping a distance of about 5 meters. Jake remained sitting on the cold stone floor, his hands resting loosely on his knees. He could feel every eye in the arena watching him, could sense the confusion and disbelief from the instructors and recruits, but he kept his focus on the creature in front of him. The beast completed one full circle, then another. Its purple eyes never left Jake, studying him with an intelligence that surprised him. The files had described Void Stalkers as mindless killing machines, but looking into those eyes, Jake saw something different. He saw awareness, curiosity, and beneath it all, fear. "This is ridiculous," someone muttered from the observation deck. "He is just sitting there." "Give him time," another voice responded. Jake recognized it as Lisa's voice, defending him even when she must be terrified for his safety. The Void Stalker moved closer. Now it was only 3 meters away. Jake could smell it now, a strange scent like ozone mixed with something earthy. The creature's breathing had changed. The aggressive rumble had faded to something softer, more questioning. Very slowly, making sure his movements were smooth and predictable, Jake extended his right hand. He kept his palm down, fingers relaxed, not reaching toward the creature but simply offering. It was the same gesture he had used 1,000 times with nervous horses, the same way he had approached frightened dogs. The Void Stalker's head lowered. Its eyes focused on Jake's hand. For a long moment, nothing happened. The entire arena seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a movement so gentle it seemed impossible for such a massive predator, the creature leaned forward and pressed the side of its face against Jake's palm. The touch sent a shock through Jake's system. The scales were warm, not cold like he had expected. They had a texture like smooth leather, and beneath them he could feel the powerful muscles of the creature's jaw. The Void Stalker closed its eyes, and that rumbling sound came again, but this time it was different. It was not a threat. It was something like a purr. "Impossible," Vexthor whispered from somewhere behind Jake. "In 40 years of training, I have never seen anything like this." Jake moved his hand slowly along the creature's jaw, feeling the contours of its face. "Hey there," he whispered, too quiet for the translators to pick up. "You are okay. Nobody's going to hurt you anymore." The beast leaned into his touch, seeking more contact. Jake used his other hand now, both palms moving gently over the creature's head and neck. The Void Stalker's entire body seemed to relax, the tension flowing out of its muscles like water. Jake stood up slowly, and the creature followed his movement with its eyes but did not pull away. He kept one hand on the beast's neck, maintaining contact. "I am going to call you Shadow," he said softly, "because you move like darkness. Is that okay?" Shadow, as if understanding the name, made that purring rumble again and pressed closer to Jake. The human had to brace himself to avoid being knocked over by the creature's affectionate push. The arena erupted in noise. Aliens in the observation decks were shouting in a dozen different languages, their translators struggling to keep up. The recruits on the floor stood frozen, unable to process what they had just witnessed. Even Vexthor seemed at a loss for words, his mandibles hanging open in shock. Commander Hal Rogers, the human liaison officer, appeared at the edge of the arena. He was an older man with gray hair and a face marked by years of military service. He had been the one who had approved Jake's application to the Beast Handler Corps, despite every regulation saying humans were unsuitable. "Instructor Vexthor," Rogers called out, his voice cutting through the chaos. "I believe we need to document this. Everything that just happened needs to go into the official record." Vexthor recovered his composure and descended from his platform. He approached Jake and Shadow carefully, his forearms held in a gesture that Jake had learned meant peaceful intentions. The instructor walked around them in a slow circle, observing from every angle. "How did you do this?" Vexthor asked finally. "What technique did you use?" Jake kept his hand on Shadow's neck, feeling the creature's steady breathing. "I did not use a technique, instructor. I just listened to what Shadow was telling me." "The creature cannot speak," Vexthor pointed out. "Not with words," Jake agreed, "but with its body, with its movements, with the sounds it made." Shadow was scared. Everything about its posture screamed fear, so I made myself non-threatening. I gave it space and time. I let it make the choice to approach me. Vexithor's mandibles clicked together in thought. This goes against everything we know about bonding with beasts. The established protocol requires dominance, control, the assertion of authority. "Maybe that works for some creatures," Jake said, But Shadow did not need someone to dominate it. Shadow needed someone to trust. Lisa Chen had made her way down to the arena floor, her medical kit clutched in her hands. She stopped a few meters away, staring at Jake and the massive predator with wonder in her eyes. "Jake, do you realize what you have just done? Void Stalkers have killed dozens of handlers. Nobody has ever even touched one without restraints." Shadow's head turned toward Lisa and she froze. But the creature only regarded her with mild curiosity, before turning its attention back to Jake, seeking more contact with its head. "I think," Commander Rogers said slowly, "we need to completely rethink our approach to the Beast Handler program. Morrison, how would you like to continue working with this creature?" "I would like that very much, sir," Jake replied. "But not with the neural collar. Shadow and I do not need that." "Unacceptable," Vexthor said immediately. "The collar is a safety requirement. If the beast becomes aggressive, we need a way to control it." Jake looked at Shadow, at the way the creature leaned against him, at the trust in those purple eyes. "Shadow will not become aggressive unless someone threatens it. Or threatens me." As if to prove his point, one of the Zenthari recruits, the one who had bet Jake would not last 20 seconds, approached from the side. His massive frame moved with warrior grace, but his body language was challenging, aggressive. Shadow's head snapped toward him, and that warning rumble returned to its chest. The Zenthari stopped immediately, his rocky skin paling slightly. "I meant no threat," he said quickly. "Shadow knows," Jake said. "Animals can read intention better than we can. Your body language said you were looking for a confrontation. Shadow was just protecting me." The Zenthari recruit backed away carefully and Shadow's rumbling stopped. The creature relaxed again, pressing its head against Jake's chest. Vexthor watched this exchange with increasing fascination. "You are saying that the creature has bonded with you already?" "After one meeting, yes," Jake said simply, "because I offered friendship instead of dominance. Trust instead of fear." Commander Rogers pulled out a communication device and began speaking rapidly to someone on the other end. Jake caught phrases like unprecedented success and need to inform Coalition Command. This was bigger than just one human bonding with one creature. This was proof that Earth's approach to things might have value in the wider galaxy. Over the next hour, Jake learned that Shadow would follow him anywhere. When he walked across the arena floor, the Voidstalker paced beside him like a giant, deadly dog. When he sat down to rest, Shadow curled up nearby, always keeping Jake within sight. The bond between them was undeniable. The other recruits kept their distance, watching with a mixture of fear and amazement. Some of them looked angry, like Jake had somehow cheated. Others looked thoughtful, like they were reconsidering everything they knew about beast handling. Lisa brought Jake some water and a nutrition bar. She sat down beside him, careful to keep her movements slow and calm around Shadow. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said softly. "All those stories you told me about training horses on the ranch, you really did learn something the rest of the galaxy missed." "Grandpa always said that every creature just wants to feel safe," Jake replied, watching Shadow doze in the afternoon light, streaming through the arena's transparent roof. "He said if you can give them that feeling, they will trust you with anything. I guess it does not matter if the creature is from Earth or from a death world halfway across the galaxy. Fear is fear, and trust is trust." Vexthor returned with several other instructors. They formed a semicircle around Jake and Shadow, keeping a respectful distance. The Krillian instructors seemed to have accepted what had happened, but Jake could see the struggle in his expression. Everything Vexthor had believed about beast handling had just been challenged. "Morrison," Vexthor said formally, "I am assigning you private training space for you and your creature. You will continue to work with it, developing your methods. Other instructors will observe and document your techniques. If what you have discovered can be taught to others, it could change everything we know about the Beast Handler Corps." "Thank you, instructor," Jake said. "But I have one request, and what is it?" "Please stop calling Shadow it," Jake said gently. "Shadow is a he, and he is not just a training tool. He is my partner." Vexthor's mandibles clicked in what Jake was learning to recognize as surprise. The concept of partnership with a beast, rather than ownership or control, was clearly foreign to him. But after a moment, the instructor nodded. "Very well. Your partner. We will make the appropriate adjustments to the documentation." The training facility on Arcturus Prime was huge. It stretched across miles of metal and glass, filled with aliens from every corner of the galaxy. Jake Morrison walked through the main corridor, trying not to stare at the strange creatures around him. Some had forearms, others had scales instead of skin, and a few floated in the air without any visible means of support. He was far from home. Colorado felt like a distant dream now, a place of mountains and horses that existed in another lifetime. Jake had left Earth 3 months ago, traveling through space on a coalition transport ship. He was 24 years old and had volunteered for something that everyone said was impossible for humans. The Beast Handler Corps was legendary across the galaxy. These were the warriors who could bond with dangerous creatures and use them in combat. Every major battle in coalition history had been won with the help of trained beasts. But humans had never succeeded in this field. They were too small, too weak, too soft compared to the other species. Jake did not care what everyone said. He had grown up on a ranch, working with animals that other people feared. He knew horses that could kill a man with one kick. He had trained dogs that other trainers had given up on. He understood something that the aliens did not seem to know. Every creature, no matter how dangerous, just wanted to feel safe. The corridor opened into a massive arena. Jake stopped and looked up. The ceiling was so high he could barely see it. The floor was made of some kind of dark stone that had been scratched and scarred by thousands of claws. Around the edges, observation decks rose in tiers filled with aliens watching the training below. Morrison, Jake, human, Earth origin. A voice spoke behind him. Jake turned and saw a creature that made his breath catch. It stood over 7 feet tall with 4 arms and a head that looked like it belonged to an insect. Its skin was a deep purple color, and when it spoke, mandibles clicked together near its mouth. "Yes, sir," Jake said, keeping his voice steady. "I am Instructor Vexthor. You will address me as instructor at all times." The alien's eyes, all 6 of them, focused on Jake with obvious disapproval. "I have reviewed your file. You have no military experience, no formal training with exotic species. Your only qualification is that you worked on an animal farm." "A ranch, sir, instructor," Jake corrected gently. "We raised horses and trained working dogs." Vexthor made a sound that the translator device on his belt turned into laughter. It was not a kind sound. "Horses. Small harmless creatures bred for docility. You think this prepares you for bonding with a void stalker?" Jake had read about void stalkers during his journey to Arcturus Prime. They were apex predators from a death world called Crixmol, 3 meters tall at the shoulder, claws that could cut through starship armor, teeth like crystal daggers. The file said they had never been successfully tamed. Not by the Xanthari warriors, not by the Mothrak soldiers, not by any species in the coalition. "I think every animal can be understood." "Instructor," Jake said quietly. The other recruits had gathered now. Jake could see them watching from across the arena. Most were massive compared to him. The Xanthari stood like living statues, their rocky skin gleaming under the lights. The Mothrak had metal implants covering half their bodies, making them look more machine than organic. Among them, Jake looked like a child. One other human stood in the group. Lisa Chen, a woman Jake had met during basic training. She had washed out of combat trials but had stayed on as a medical trainee. She gave him a small wave, her expression worried. Vexthor gestured to the arena floor. "Today you will attempt first contact with your assigned creatures. This is not a bonding exercise. This is a test of courage. Most of you will fail. The creatures you face today are considered impossible to train. We use them to teach humility." The instructor's mandibles clicked again as he looked directly at Jake. "Morrison, since you are so confident about your animal farm experience, you will demonstrate first." The other recruits shifted, and Jake heard what might have been laughter from several of them. A Xanthari warrior, his skin marked with combat scars, spoke in a deep voice that rumbled like thunder. "The human will not last 30 seconds. 20 seconds, another voice called out. Jake ignored them. He had heard doubt before. Every time he had approached a wild horse, every time he had worked with a dog that had been beaten and broken, people had told him it was impossible. He had learned not to listen to impossible. Vexthor led him to a weapon rack near the arena wall. He picked up a metal collar, its surface covered in lights and small devices. "This is a neural restraint. When you get close enough, you place it around the creature's neck. It will create a control link between your mind and the beast, in theory." "Has it ever worked?" Jake asked. "No," Vexthor said bluntly. "But protocol requires we try. When the creature attacks, a barrier will activate to protect you. Try not to embarrass your species too much while you are running away. Jake took the collar. It was heavy cold metal against his hands. He looked at it for a moment, then looked up at the instructor. What if there is another way? There is no other way, Vexthor said. The protocol has been refined over centuries. Follow it or leave the program. Across the arena, a massive door began to open. The sound of metal scraping against metal echoed through the space. Behind that door, Jake knew, was the Voidstalker. His assigned creature, the beast that was supposed to teach him humility. The door opened wider, and Jake could see movement in the darkness beyond. Something large prowled in the shadows, pacing back and forth. He could hear breathing deep and heavy and a low rumble that made the floor vibrate under his feet. Begin when ready, Vexthor announced, his voice carrying across the arena. And Morrison, try to give us at least a minute of entertainment before you fail. Jake walked forward, the neural collar hanging from his left hand. His boots made soft sounds on the scarred stone floor. Behind him, he could hear the other recruits taking bets on how quickly he would run. Above, in the observation decks, hundreds of aliens watched and waited to see the human fail. The Voidstalker emerged from the shadows like darkness given form. Jake stopped walking and just stared. The creature was bigger than the files had described. Its scales were black, so black they seemed to absorb the light around them. 6 eyes glowed with purple light, all of them focused on Jake. When it opened its mouth, he could see rows of crystalline teeth, each one as long as his hand. The beast took one step forward, and the rumble in its chest grew louder. It was a sound of warning, of threat, telling Jake to stay back or face the consequences. Its claws scraped against the floor, leaving fresh scratches in the ancient stone. Jake stood 15 meters away from the creature. He could feel his heart beating fast, could feel the fear trying to take control. But he had felt this before. Every wild animal he had ever faced had made him feel this way. The trick was not to let the fear control him. He looked at the Voidstalker and saw past the claws and teeth. He saw the tension in its shoulders, the way it held its head low, the rapid movement of its eyes. He had seen this body language before in horses fresh from the wild, in dogs that had been abused, in every creature that had learned to survive by trusting nothing. The Voidstalker was not angry. It was terrified. Jake made a decision. He slowly bent down and placed the neural collar on the ground beside him. Then, moving carefully, he sat down cross-legged on the cold stone floor. He did not look directly at the creature. He did not make any threatening moves. He just sat there and waited. Morrison, what are you doing? Vexthor's voice came from behind him, sharp with confusion. Follow the protocol. Approach the creature. Jake did not answer. His eyes were on the Voidstalker, watching its every movement. The beast had stopped rumbling. Its head tilted to one side, and Jake could see confusion in those glowing purple eyes. This was not how creatures usually approached it. This was different. The arena had gone completely silent. Even the recruits had stopped making jokes. Everyone watched as the human sat motionless on the floor, and the deadly predator stared at him. Minutes passed. Jake's legs started to ache from sitting still, but he did not move. He kept his breathing slow and steady. He let his shoulders relax. He made himself as non-threatening as possible. The Voidstalker took one step forward, then another. It moved slowly, cautiously, like it was approaching something it did not understand. Its nose, if that flat area on its face could be called a nose, twitched as it tried to catch Jake's scent. The news about Jake and Shadow spread across the coalition like wildfire. Within days, military channels were buzzing with reports of the human who had tamed a Voidstalker. Scientists wanted to study their bond. Diplomats saw it as proof of Earth's value. And warriors from the most prestigious beast handler units wanted to see if it was real or just an elaborate trick. On the 32nd day after Jake's first contact with Shadow, 3 ships arrived at Arcturus Prime. They carried Xanthari warriors from the elite Dragon Corps, the most famous beast handlers in the galaxy. At their head was Battlemaster Crix, a legend among his people. Crix had bonded with over 20 combat beasts in his 40 years of service. He had fought in 12 major conflicts and never lost a beast to injury or death. His reputation was flawless. He was also, Jake learned quickly, not happy about what Jake had done. Commander Rogers called Jake to his office that afternoon. Lisa insisted on coming along, claiming Jake needed moral support. When they arrived, they found Vexthor already there, along with 3 massive Zenthari warriors. The smallest of them was over 6 feet tall and built like a tank. The largest, who stood in the center, was nearly 7 feet of solid muscle and scarred skin. "Morrison," Commander Rogers said, his expression serious. "This is Battlemaster Crix of the Zenthari Dragon Corps." Crix looked at Jake the way a butcher might look at a piece of meat. His forearms were crossed over his broad chest, and his rocky skin had markings that Jake recognized as battle honors. Each mark represented a successful campaign, a creature bonded, a victory earned through strength and skill. "You are the human," Crix said, his voice so deep that Jake felt it in his chest. The translator struggled to capture the disdain in his tone. "Yes, sir," Jake replied, keeping his voice respectful. He could feel the tension in the room like a physical presence. "I have watched recordings of your demonstration," Crix continued. "Your Void Stalker obeys you. This is impressive for a human. But I have questions about whether this is true bonding or simply luck." "What do you mean by luck?" Jake asked. Crix gestured dismissively with one of his hands. "Perhaps your creature is damaged. Perhaps it was already broken before you found it. Perhaps your bond will not survive real pressure, real danger. Demonstrations in safe arenas prove nothing about combat readiness." Commander Rogers leaned forward. "Battlemaster Crix has invoked his right to challenge your credentials, Morrison. Under Coalition military protocol, any handler can request a formal evaluation of another handler's abilities." "What kind of evaluation?" Lisa asked, her voice tight with worry. Crix smiled, showing sharp teeth. "A combat trial. You and your creature against one of mine. Standard non-lethal rules. We fight until one side yields or can no longer continue. It is the traditional way to prove skill in the Beast Handler Corps." Jake felt his stomach drop. He had trained with Shadow for barely a month. Crix had decades of experience. This was not going to be a fair fight, and everyone in the room knew it. "You do not have to accept," Vexthor said quietly. "A challenge from a battlemaster to a recruit is highly unusual. Most would consider it inappropriate." But Jake understood what was really happening. If he refused, everyone would assume his success with Shadow was just luck. They would dismiss everything he had done as a fluke, a one-time accident that meant nothing for the future of beast handling. His methods would be forgotten and the traditional ways would continue unchanged. "I accept," Jake said. Lisa grabbed his arm. "Jake, you cannot be serious. Crix has been doing this since before you were born." "I know," Jake said softly. "But if I do not fight, then everything Shadow and I have proven means nothing. They will never take trust-based bonding seriously if they think I am afraid to test it." Crix nodded approvingly. "Good, a warrior's response. Perhaps humans have more courage than I thought. The trial will be in 3 days. That gives you time to prepare and me time to select an appropriate creature for the match." After the Zenthari warriors left, Commander Rogers poured himself a drink and offered one to Vexthor. The Krillian instructor accepted, which surprised Jake since he had never seen Vexthor drink anything except water. "This is bad," Rogers said bluntly. "Crix is not just testing you, Morrison. He is testing whether humans belong in the Beast Handler Corps at all. If you lose badly, it will set back our entire integration into Coalition military structures." "No pressure then," Jake said, trying to make a joke. No one laughed. The next 3 days were intense. Vexthor personally trained Jake in combat protocols that he had not yet learned. How to read an opponent's movements, how to anticipate attacks, how to use a beast's strengths while covering its weaknesses. The Krillian instructor was thorough and demanding, pushing Jake harder than ever before. "Crix will choose a Thunderhawk," Vexthor explained during one training session. "They are his specialty. Larger than Void Stalkers, heavily armored, and capable of bioelectric attacks that can paralyze opponents. So we are outmatched in size and power," Jake said, watching Shadow practice evasion drills. "Yes," Vexthor agreed, "but you have advantages that Crix does not expect. Shadow is faster, and more importantly, your bond is based on trust rather than control. That makes you unpredictable. Crix fights with traditional methods. He will expect you to meet strength with strength. Do not use Shadow's speed," Jake said, understanding. "Hit and retreat. Do not let the Thunderhawk pin us down." "Exactly," Vexthor clicked his mandibles in approval. "You cannot win through force, but you might win through strategy." The day of the trial arrived. The main arena was packed even fuller than during Jake's demonstration. Word had spread beyond Arcturus Prime. The recording feeds were being watched by millions across Coalition space. This was not just a fight between two handlers. It was a symbolic contest between traditional methods and the new approach that Jake represented. Jake entered the arena riding Shadow. The Void Stalker's scales gleamed under the lights, and his purple eyes were bright with anticipation. Jake could feel Shadow's excitement through their bond, but also his trust. Whatever happened, they would face it together. Crix entered on his Thunderhawk, and Jake understood immediately why Vexthor had been worried. The creature was massive, easily half again as large as Shadow. Its body was covered in metallic feathers that crackled with electricity. When it screamed, the sound was like thunder, shaking the arena walls. It was built for power, for overwhelming force, for crushing anything in its path. Shadow shifted nervously beneath Jake, but did not panic. Jake leaned forward and whispered, "Easy, boy. I know he is big, but we are faster. Trust me." The Void Stalker settled, responding to Jake's calm confidence. This was what their bond meant. Shadow trusted Jake to keep them safe, and Jake trusted Shadow to follow his guidance. Commander Rogers stood on the central platform. Combat trial rules are as follows. Fight continues until yield or incapacitation. Lethal force is prohibited. Neural safeguards are active on both creatures. Begin on my mark. Jake adjusted his position on Shadow's back, finding his center of balance. He watched Crix studying the Battlemaster's posture. The Xanthari warrior sat on his Thunderhawk like he was part of the creature, decades of experience evident in every small movement. 3, Rogers counted down. 2, 1, begin. Crix spurred his Thunderhawk forward immediately. The massive creature charged across the arena, electricity arcing between its feathers in a dazzling display. It was pure intimidation, meant to make opponents freeze in fear. But Jake had grown up breaking wild horses. He knew about intimidation. Left now, he said, and Shadow moved. The Void Stalker darted left with blinding speed, avoiding the charge completely. As the Thunderhawk thundered past, Shadow struck, claws raking across the larger creature's flank before retreating out of range. First blood, though the wound was superficial. The crowd roared. Jake had actually landed a hit on Crix's beast. The Battlemaster's expression darkened. He wheeled his mount around, more careful this time. He began to circle, the Thunderhawk releasing pulses of electricity trying to corner Shadow, to force the smaller creature into a position where size and power would matter more than speed. But Jake had planned for this. He had studied recordings of Thunderhawk fights during his 3 days of preparation. He knew their patterns, their limitations. Stay mobile, he told Shadow. Do not let him trap us. They moved like water, flowing around every attack. The Thunderhawk was powerful but slower. Each time it tried to pin them down, Shadow was already somewhere else. And each time Crix overextended, pressing too hard in one direction, Shadow would dart in and score another hit before retreating. 5 minutes into the fight, Jake could see Crix's frustration mounting. The Battlemaster was used to opponents who would meet him head-on, who would try to match his Thunderhawk's power. He did not know how to fight someone who refused to engage on his terms. Now, Jake whispered to Shadow. Full speed. The Void Stalker's muscles bunched and released. Suddenly, instead of retreating, Shadow charged forward. The change in tactics caught Crix completely off guard. Shadow feinted left but went right, getting inside the Thunderhawk's guard faster than the larger creature could react. Shadow's claws found the pressure points that Vexthor had taught Jake, the vulnerable spots in a Thunderhawk's armor. 3 weeks passed and Jake fell into a routine with Shadow. Every morning before the artificial sun came up over Arcturus Prime, he would enter the habitat dome where Shadow stayed. The dome was large, designed to hold dangerous creatures safely with reinforced walls and monitoring systems. But Jake never felt like he was visiting a prisoner. Shadow always greeted him with that rumbling purr, pressing his massive head against Jake's chest in welcome. Sometimes Jake talked while Shadow listened. He told stories about growing up in Colorado, about the mountains and the snow, about his family's ranch. He talked about the horses they raised, about a particularly stubborn mare named Daisy who had taken 3 months to trust anyone. He talked about his decision to leave Earth, to see the stars, to find his place in the wider universe. Other times, Jake simply sat in silence while Shadow dozed nearby. The Void Stalker seemed to like these quiet moments as much as the times when Jake spoke. It was like the creature just wanted company, wanted to know that someone cared enough to spend time with him without wanting anything in return. The other recruits trained with their creatures using the traditional methods. Jake could hear the sounds echoing through the facility, shouted commands, the buzz of neural restraints, the occasional roar of an angry beast fighting against control. The success rate was low. Out of 20 recruits who had started the program, only 5 still had their assigned creatures. The others had been removed after failing to establish even basic control. Meanwhile, Jake and Shadow had moved far beyond basic control. They had something deeper, something the instructors struggled to understand or measure. On the 19th day, Vexthor announced that Jake would demonstrate his methods in the main arena. The entire facility would watch, and Coalition military observers would attend via remote link. This was Jake's chance to prove that his approach was not just luck, that what he had done with Shadow could be replicated by others. Lisa helped him prepare that morning. She had become Shadow's unofficial veterinarian, the only other person the Voidstalker would tolerate touching him. She checked Shadow's scales, examined his claws, and ran a scanner over his body to verify he was in perfect health. "His stress levels are remarkable," Lisa said, reviewing the scanner data. "Most training beasts show elevated cortisol and other stress markers. Shadow's readings are lower than we typically see in creatures living in the wild." "He is happy," Jake said simply, running his hand along Shadow's neck. "He knows he is safe here. That makes all the difference." They walked to the arena together, Jake on foot and Shadow pacing beside him. There were no restraints, no control collars, no handlers standing by with stun weapons. Just a human and a Voidstalker moving side by side like old friends. The arena was packed. Every observation deck was filled with aliens from across the facility. Jake recognized some of the faces now. The Zenthari warriors who had mocked him on his first day. The Mothrak soldiers who had bet he would fail. The instructors who had doubted that humans belonged in the Beast Handler Corps. Commander Rogers stood on the main platform with several high-ranking officers Jake did not recognize. They wore uniforms marked with symbols from different coalition species, signs of authority that crossed cultural boundaries. "Whenever you are ready, Morrison," Vexthor announced through the arena's sound system. Jake took a deep breath and walked to the center of the arena floor. Shadow followed, his scales rippling in the light. The creature's purple eyes scanned the observation decks, taking in the hundreds of watching aliens, but he showed no signs of aggression or fear. Shadow trusted Jake, and if Jake was calm, then there was nothing to worry about. "I'm going to show you what trust looks like," Jake called out, his voice amplified for everyone to hear. "This is not about dominance or control. This is about partnership." He started with simple things, hand signals that Shadow had learned over the past weeks. A raised palm meant stop. A pointed finger meant go in that direction. A circular motion meant come back to me. Shadow responded to each signal instantly, moving with grace and precision that seemed impossible for such a large creature. The watching aliens murmured among themselves. This level of obedience usually took months of neural training to achieve. Jake had done it in 3 weeks using nothing but patience and positive reinforcement. Then Jake moved on to more complex demonstrations. He set up an obstacle course, barriers and platforms arranged in a challenging pattern. Shadow navigated it perfectly, jumping over walls, weaving between posts, climbing up and down ramps, all without a single command being spoken. Jake guided him using only body language and the bond of trust they had built. "Now watch this," Jake said. He approached one of the practice targets, padded dummies used for combat training. Shadow, defensive stance. The Voidstalker's entire demeanor changed. The relaxed, friendly creature became a predator in an instant. His body lowered, muscles coiling like springs. His eyes focused on the dummy with laser intensity. But he did not attack. He waited for Jake's command, ready but controlled. "Hold," Jake said, walking away from Shadow. He moved 10 meters away, then 20. Shadow remained locked in position, not moving despite the distance between them. The level of control was astounding. Most beasts would have either attacked the dummy or broken stance to follow their handler. Jake raised his hand. Now, Shadow exploded forward. The speed was breathtaking. In 2 seconds, he had crossed 20 meters and struck the dummy with enough force to send it flying across the arena floor. Then immediately he stopped. No frenzied attack, no loss of control. One strike, perfectly measured, and then stillness. "Return," Jake called, and Shadow trotted back to his side, that rumbling purr vibrating through his chest. Jake rewarded him with affection, scratching behind the ridges near Shadow's eyes where the Voidstalker liked it most. The observation decks erupted in applause and excited chatter. Even the skeptical Zenthari warriors were impressed. They had never seen this level of precision from a void stalker, never seen such perfect control without neural restraints. But Jake was not done. "There is one more thing," he announced. "Something that people said was impossible with void stalkers." He approached Shadow's side and placed his hand on the creature's shoulder. Then, in one smooth motion, he pulled himself up onto Shadow's back. He settled into the natural groove between the void stalker's shoulder blades, a space that seemed almost designed to hold a rider. The arena went silent. Beast riding was considered suicidal with void stalkers. Their spines were not built for weight, and their instincts made them violently reject anything on their backs. Several handlers had died attempting it over the years, but Shadow did not buck or thrash. He simply stood waiting patiently for Jake to get comfortable. When Jake leaned forward slightly, indicating he was ready, Shadow began to walk. They started slow, letting everyone see that this was real, not some trick or illusion. Shadow's movements were smooth. His gait adjusted to carry Jake safely. Then, as Jake shifted his weight forward, Shadow increased his pace to a trot, then a run. The void stalker moved like flowing darkness across the arena floor. Jake guided him with subtle weight shifts and gentle pressure from his legs. No reins, no controls, just two beings moving together in perfect harmony. They made sharp turns, sudden stops, leaping over barriers with Jake holding on but never appearing unbalanced or in danger of falling. Lisa was crying in the medical observation area. She wiped her eyes but could not stop smiling. Her friend, the ranch kid from Colorado, was doing something no one in the galaxy had ever done. He was riding a void stalker like it was the most natural thing in the world. When they finally came to a stop in the center of the arena, Jake dismounted and stood beside Shadow. The void stalker leaned against him affectionately, clearly happy with their performance. Jake scratched under Shadow's jaw, and the creature's eyes half closed in contentment. The applause was deafening. Aliens from every species were on their feet, showing approval in their various cultural ways. Some clapped, others whistled. A few made harmonic sounds that their translators could not quite capture. Commander Rogers descended from the platform and approached Jake. The older man had tears in his eyes, but he was smiling broadly. "Son, do you have any idea what you have just done? You have proven that humanity deserves a place in the Coalition, not because we can fight like the Zenthari or think like the Mothrak, but because we bring something unique, something valuable." Vexthor joined them, his movements slower than usual, almost hesitant. The Krillian instructor stood before Jake and performed a gesture that Jake had never seen before. All four arms crossed over his chest and his head bowed low. It was a sign of deep respect, one that Vexthor had never shown to any recruit. "I owe you an apology," Vexthor said, his translated voice heavy with emotion. "When you arrived, I saw only your physical limitations. I did not see your strengths. I was wrong about you, Morrison, and I was wrong about what it means to bond with a beast." "You were not wrong to be skeptical, instructor," Jake replied gently. "My way is different, not better. There are probably some creatures who need the traditional methods, who respond to strength and dominance. But for Shadow, for creatures like him, trust works better than control." 6 months after Jake's trial with Battlemaster Crix, everything had changed. The challenge had been recorded and broadcast across Coalition space. Military academies analyzed the fight in their tactical classes. Beast handler training programs requested copies of Jake's methods. Even species who had never shown interest in beast handling suddenly wanted to learn about trust-based bonding. Jake had been promoted to specialist rank, which was unusual for someone so new to the military. But Commander Rogers had argued that Jake's contribution went beyond normal service. He had fundamentally changed how the Coalition approached one of its most important military assets. The training facility on Arcturus Prime had expanded. New domes were constructed specifically for the experimental bonding program that Jake had inspired. Other handlers, both human and alien, were learning to approach dangerous creatures with patience instead of force. The success rate was not perfect. Some beasts still responded better to traditional methods. But for creatures like void stalkers, for the animals that had been considered impossible to train, the trust-based approach worked far better than anything else. Lisa Chen had completed her veterinary certification and was now the chief medical officer for all beast handlers on the facility. She had written 3 research papers on the psychological benefits of trust bonding, showing that creatures trained with Jake's methods had lower stress levels, longer lifespans, and fewer health problems than those trained traditionally. Vexthor had undergone his own transformation. The Krillian instructor who had once mocked Jake now taught classes on human bonding techniques. He lectured about patience, about reading body language, about giving creatures the space to choose trust. Some of his older colleagues thought he had gone soft, but the results spoke for themselves. His students had the highest success rate in the entire program, but the biggest change was happening on Earth. The Coalition had approved construction of the Morrison Institute for Interspecies Bonding, named after Jake despite his protests. It would be humanity's first major contribution to Coalition military infrastructure. The facility would train handlers from across the galaxy in the methods that Jake had pioneered. Now, on the day before Jake was scheduled to return to Earth to help establish the new institute, he took Shadow out to the wilderness preserve at the edge of Arcturus Prime. It was a quiet place, filled with plants from a dozen worlds, where handlers could let their beasts run free in a safe environment. Jake sat on a hill overlooking a valley of bioluminescent flowers. Shadow explored the area with obvious joy, chasing small flying creatures and rolling in patches of alien grass. The Void Stalker had changed over the past months. He moved with more confidence now, his scales brighter, his eyes clearer. Trust, Jake had learned, was not just emotionally healthy. It was physically beneficial too. Lisa joined him on the hill carrying 2 containers of coffee. She sat down and handed him one, watching Shadow play in the valley below. "Nervous about tomorrow?" she asked. "A little," Jake admitted. "Everything has happened so fast. 6 months ago I was just a recruit. Now I am supposed to revolutionize military training for the entire Coalition." "You already have," Lisa pointed out. "The rest is just teaching others what you already know." Shadow returned from his exploration and flopped down beside Jake, panting from exertion. The massive Void Stalker looked about as threatening as a puppy, his tongue hanging out and his eyes bright with happiness. Jake scratched behind Shadow's eye ridges and the creature made that rumbling purr that always meant contentment. "Do you remember what Vexthor said to you on the first day?" Lisa asked. "He said you would probably die within minutes of meeting Shadow." Jake laughed. "I remember. I also remember all the recruits betting on how fast I would run away." "They were all wrong," Lisa said. "Not because you were stronger or tougher than them, but because you saw something they did not. You looked at Shadow and saw fear instead of aggression. You offered trust instead of control. That is your real gift, Jake. You see what others miss." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the alien sunset paint the sky in colors that Earth had no names for. In the distance, other handlers walked with their beasts, some using new methods, others sticking to traditional approaches. It was not about one way being right and the other being wrong. It was about having options, about matching the method to the creature. Footsteps approached from behind. Jake turned and saw Vexthor climbing the hill, moving with the careful grace of someone who had just finished a long day of teaching. The Krillian instructor settled himself on a rock nearby, his mandibles clicking in a pattern that Jake had learned meant tiredness. "I came to say farewell," Vexthor said, "and to thank you one final time." "You do not need to thank me, instructor," Jake replied. "Yes, I do," Vexthor insisted. "I have been training handlers for 40 years. I thought I knew everything about bonding with beasts. Then you arrived and showed me that I had been wrong about the most fundamental things. You taught me that strength comes in many forms, and that the way I had always done things was not the only way." Vexthor looked at Shadow, who watched the instructor with cautious but not hostile eyes. The Void Stalker had learned to trust Vexthor over the months, though never as completely as he trusted Jake. "I was terrified when you first sat down in front of that creature," Vexthor continued. "I was certain you would die. I had written the incident report in my head, explaining how another foolish human had ignored protocol and paid the price. Instead, I witnessed something I had thought impossible. You bonded with a Void Stalker in minutes using nothing but patience and empathy. Shadow was ready to trust," Jake said. "He just needed someone to offer it." "Perhaps," Vexthor agreed. "But many handlers had tried before you. They all failed because they approached Shadow with fear and aggression. You approached him with calm and respect. That made all the difference." Commander Rogers appeared at the base of the hill, his gray hair catching the fading sunlight. He climbed up to join them, moving slower than he used to. The past months had been stressful for him too. Managing the political fallout of Jake's success, defending the new program against traditionalists who thought it was dangerous. "Thought I would find you all here," Rogers said, settling down with a grunt. "Having a farewell party without inviting me?" "Just talking, sir," Jake replied. Rogers looked at Shadow, at the way the Void Stalker dozed peacefully beside Jake. "You know, when I approved your application to the Beast Handler Corps, I had no idea what would happen. I just thought it was unfair to reject humans without giving them a real chance. I figured worst case you would wash out like the others. Best case, maybe you would scrape by and prove humans could do the job." He laughed and shook his head. "I never imagined you would turn the entire field upside down. The Coalition High Command has been arguing about your methods for months. Some love it, some hate it, but nobody can deny the results. You have trained Void Stalkers that everyone said were untamable. You have bonded with creatures that killed their previous handlers, and you have done it all without neural restraints or control collars." "It is not just me," Jake protested. "Other handlers are using these methods now too. The approach works for anyone willing to try it." "Not everyone," Vexthor corrected gently. "Some handlers do not have the patience. Some cannot overcome their own fear enough to offer trust. Your methods work, but they require certain qualities that not everyone possesses." Lisa stood up and stretched. "That is true for any skill, though. Not everyone can be a doctor or an engineer or a pilot. The important thing is that we now know there is another way to bond with beasts. Handlers who have the right temperament can choose this path instead of being forced into traditional methods that do not suit them." The conversation continued as the artificial sun completed its descent, and stars began appearing in the dome's transparent ceiling. They talked about the future, about the Morrison Institute, about how Jake's methods might be applied to other aspects of Coalition military training. They talked about what it meant that a species as young as humanity had contributed something valuable so quickly after joining the galactic community. Eventually, Lisa and Commander Rogers left to handle final preparations for tomorrow's departure. Vexthor lingered a moment longer. "I have a gift for you," the Krillian instructor said, pulling something from a pouch on his belt. It was a small medallion, made of metal that seemed to shift colors in the dim light. "This is a Krillian honor token. It is given to students who have taught their teachers something profound. I have carried mine for 30 years, received from my own instructor. Now I give one to you." Jake took the medallion, feeling the weight of it in his palm. "Instructor, I do not know what to say." "Say nothing," Vexthor replied. "Just remember that learning never stops. You have taught me much, Morrison. But you still have much to learn. Stay humble, stay curious, and keep that remarkable creature of yours safe." After Vexthor left, Jake sat alone with Shadow under the stars. The Void Stalker had woken and now rested his massive head in Jake's lap. They had come so far together from that first terrifying meeting in the arena to this peaceful moment under alien stars. "Tomorrow we go home," Jake whispered to Shadow. "Back to Earth. You are going to love."